Hey everyone, we are so excited to come here today to talk about trauma recovery one-on-one, the many faces of trauma. And I'm here with Monica Hendricks, who ironically, I've never met in person. We've had phone calls and video calls. We met 2 years ago. She's a certified conscious relationship and trauma recovery coach, and I'm going to let her talk about how amazing she is. But we're excited to talk to you today. I connected with her on LinkedIn during the beginning of my journey to heal as a survivor of child sexual abuse. As many know, and those who don't know me or follow me, in 2016, my repressed memories of experiencing child sexual abuse started to come up after I was while raising my 3-year-old daughter, who's now 6, and my son was 2 at the time. And so it was a pretty traumatic experience to have those memories come back up, but I'm happy that they did. And so I've spent every year since then talking about what the journey looks like, recovery, the journey to heal. And that's how I saw Monica's profile come up on LinkedIn. And I was intrigued by her because she was a healer. And we reconnected since the onset of COVID, and I'm really happy that we're doing this talk today. Trauma is not gender specific, it's not age specific. Trauma doesn't care what your income is, what your race is. You know, we all experience it in different ways. Many people have experienced it in the past year because of COVID. So we're excited to talk about how to deal with it. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Monica to talk about how amazing she is.
Thank you so much, Nubia. It's great to be here with you today. And yeah, I love how the universe works. And, here we are 2 years later, having this great conversation. And so, thank you for, sharing the space with me today. And, thank you for also sharing part of your journey with me, right? Because I remember our first conversation, I remember connecting with you, and it really hit home for me too, because, I do this work. I'm very passionate about it, but I too, am a survivor of childhood abuse and various degrees of trauma throughout my life. And so, it's really important to me that we do spread the awareness, that we do get the message out that healing is possible, recovery is possible. And so, that being said, I am a certified trauma-informed conscious relationship trauma recovery coach. And I assist my clients one-on-one with helping them let go of, the feelings and the emotions that really shape the traumatic events that they experience, so that they can move forward, experience a life of liberation from the effects of their past traumas, and also learn to develop healthy relationships. And so, you know, growing up for me, it was really, really hard for me to learn how to connect with others on an emotional level because of the degree of emotional abuse that I experienced as a child. And so I discovered later on in life, looking back, that I had a lot of trouble in relationships, specifically intimate ones, because of the effects of the past traumas that weren't being addressed. And so I'm really excited to dive in with you today. And I love what you shared about how there's no one size fits all for trauma, right? It can affect anybody. It doesn't discriminate. There's various degrees of trauma. And I wanted to go into that with you really quick, because that's something we talked about. So
Yeah. Can you talk about the different types of trauma?
yeah, definitely. So, there's three main types of trauma. There's acute trauma, chronic trauma, and complex trauma. So I think it's important for our listeners to understand the varying differences, so they can pinpoint, where they are in their process and what they may need to work on. So acute trauma is a singular traumatic event, like a car crash or a plane crash, or 9/11, right? That was like an acute trauma for many, many people. And so it's different from chronic trauma, because chronic trauma is something like the abuse of a caregiver, right? As a child, you're experiencing trauma over a long period of time. And complex trauma are varying degrees of traumatic experiences over and over again. So complex trauma is you see that a lot in victims of narcissistic abuse. They really struggle with something called cognitive dissonance. They have a hard time distinguishing what's real from what their abuser projected onto them. And so that gets really complex. That's really deeply ingrained in the psyche. So, there's also PTSD and CPTSD. So CPTSD is different from PTSD. That's
Yeah,
also
can you
another.
explain that more? Because I've never heard of the CPTSD term before. And I was like, oh, what is this?
Yeah, of course. So PTSD is typically resulting from, again, one traumatic event, or, like soldiers when they come back from war, right? You hear it all the time that they're survivors of war, and now they have what's called PTSD, post-traumatic stress. And CPTSD is complicated post-traumatic stress. So you can receive a diagnosis of CPTSD if the trauma that you experienced was very repetitive, right? Um, Again, similar to emotional abuse. And so, in both instances, it's really, really important to learn how to regulate your nervous system, establish safety first and foremost in your environment, regulate the nervous system, and start the process of healing so that you can integrate your traumas, you can learn association again, right? You can develop agency again, and you can really take back your power. And that's really, really important for a lot of survivors of trauma, is to learn how to take their power back, right?
Yes. I
Mhm.
always talk about that. And when I started going, when the onset of the memory started to come back up, when you're in that moment, that's like the last thing on your mind is like, take your power back. You're just like, I'm just trying to figure out what the hell's going on. Right. And my therapist at the time, and everyone has a different school of thought on how to help someone who has gone through what I went through, but she never mentioned PTSD to me. What's interesting was, and I think she definitely is from the older school of thought of, you don't really talk about a diagnosis in the room. You very much are the listener, and you let the other person talk and whatever. But of course, she's taking her notes down and she's like PTSD. And what's interesting is, I was getting life insurance that same summer, and if for those who know, when you're getting life insurance, you have to give a lot of medical records. They have to know everything, to know how much of a risk you are to die soon or not, pretty healthy. So it was a pretty quick process. But, the question was, are you seeking psychotherapy? And I didn't lie. I was like, yes, I am. And so my therapist, and I think this was in August, I think June, yeah, it was like late June when this all started. And then I think it was like August when I had to fill out the paperwork. And when she handed it back to me, it said the words PTSD on it. And I was like, what? Like it didn't register that that was what I was going through. I knew that I had anxiety always. That's why I started going to therapy before all of this. It's like, I don't know why I'm always anxious, and I hate being around my family. But just seeing those words and sort of like internalizing, I'm happy it happened, because I'm the type of person where, like, I want to know everything. If there's something that is a diagnosis, tell me, don't hide it, because then I want to work through it, right?
Mhm.
So anyway, I never really actually ever talked about that part of my journey before until now, but I thought it was worth adding, because sometimes you are in therapy and certain therapists won't just tell you, because they don't want to give you that information. Maybe they think it's going to traumatize you more. But for me, I wanted to own it, understand it, read about it, and then figure out how I could, later on, like how I could help others who were going through it as well, so that we don't all feel alone. Because I feel like it can be a very lonely journey.
It can be. And, um, I think there's a lot of stigma still, unfortunately, around trauma, especially abuse, especially childhood abuse, right? It's like, I was abused as a child, right? Saying that. And then it's like, but the fact of the matter is, millions of us have experienced this to some degree, right? And I think that's also what you and I were talking about, is that, trauma for you can be registered in your body different than the same trauma happening to me, right? So every organism, every human being registers a traumatic event differently. There's varying degrees of it. So
Mhm.
what really impacts me may not really impact you, and vice versa. And that's why there is no one size fits all treatment method, right? Some people do require, a more medical grade, high level care, right? Other people do well with more holistic therapies, and there's so many different therapies out there. But the point I'm trying to make here is, if you know you're listening and you identify with anything that we're saying, please, like, know that you're not alone.
Mhm.
Me too. And know that it's okay to ask for help,
Mhm.
because it can feel scary and it can feel really, really lonely. Especially when some of the things you've experienced, you might not even have memory recall,
Mhm.
right? I didn't remember something that happened to me when I was 13 years old until literally a few years ago, when I was working with a coach, actually.
Mhm.
And my coach was speaking with me, and as we were talking and as we were unraveling parts of my past, it literally hit me. And when I tell you, when I remembered what happened to me, Nubia, I was in the fetal position sobbing for 2 days.
Mhm.
I was devastated, but I'm grateful for that process, because then I was able to, as you mentioned, learn about it, know about it, right? Have the memory, feel the emotion, register the emotion in my body, integrate it, learn to associate with that emotion
Mhm.
so that I could process that trauma, and then I can move forward. And, I'm really grateful for that experience. And I really love helping others now, right? Move forward, right? How can we take what happened to you in the past, right?
Mhm.
Look at you from you're right here, right now. This is where we want to be. You want to be liberated, you want to feel joy again, you want to connect with people again, have intimate, healthy relationships, but we have to cross this bridge now. And
Mhm.
so it's a process of, like, crossing over to the other side, right? And for me, that took a really long time, and I'm still learning. Am I
Yeah.
right? Like, there's still things that we discover all
Why,
the time.
can you talk a little bit, the mind body connection? Can you for those who aren't as well versed and haven't experienced this
Mhm,
before,
mhm.
why is it, what happens, why is it that when we experience trauma that we do often have the out of body experience and can
Yeah.
become disconnected? Can you explain that a bit?
Yeah, so when a traumatic event occurs, an imprint is created in the organism, being the human, right? And so it can get trapped and stored in our cells. There's something called cellular memory. So when a traumatic event happens, right, we have parts of our brain that are designed to protect us. Our nervous system is also designed to protect us from danger. And so when something really scary happens to us, there's a region in the brain that gets activated, and it's like a warning, right? And it says, warning, do this, secrete these hormones to protect yourself, right? But what happens is, with trauma, that part of the brain isn't able to function properly. It's almost like that system goes on overdrive and can stay on overdrive,
Mhm.
right? So, you might experience a trauma when you're 5 years old, but because it was never processed properly by the brain, if you're exposed to, let's say it was, a really loud crash, or you were in a horrible accident, and when you're older, when you hear those loud noises, similar, you're still re-triggered. You're safe now. Nothing's happening, but your body is still registering this as danger. And
Mhm.
so you're constantly in this state of high alert, and you're not able to regulate. And that's, not healthy, not only for your emotional state of being, but for your physical state of being as well, your immune system, just everything, right? So um, the body runs the brain. And so a big part of healing trauma is learning how to restore the mind body connection.
That's a great phrase. The body runs the brain.
Yeah.
You got to coin that if you're not already using it.
It's not an original, it's something I learned, but
Mm.
it's true. It's
I
true.
had I had a really bad hypervigilance experience. I
Mm,
think it was 2017. almost had been a year. My husband and I went to Vegas on his business trip, and we went to Cirque du Soleil. I think it was the Beatles Love or whatever Cirque du Soleil
Yeah,
concert, which I
yeah,
was so excited. And
a good one. Mhm.
yeah, you know, the one, his boss was there with his wife. So we, like, you know, they brought their wives and they got tickets for us to go. And in the middle of the show, there was flashing light,
Mm,
and all of a sudden, the flashing light brought me back to being a child, where a flashlight had been shown in my face by
mm,
my abuser. And I didn't know what was going on. I knew I was getting panicky. And what
mm,
happened, and I kept it together because I'm like, I'm with my
mm,
boss, I can't, like, you know. And for the rest of the evening, I later learned I was in hypervigilance mode where everything was loud, everything. And I kept saying to Chris, don't you hear like the loud noise in the hotel? Like, you know, boom, 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 like music. And he was like, I don't really hear anything. What's going on? But to me, it felt like the people next door had a DJ in their room. And I remember at one point I even called to the front desk, and they're probably like, what drugs is, you know, room 1090 on? And I was like, you've got to tell them to keep the music down, da, da, da. And, you know, all sound. Anyway, I was fine the next morning. And then I just felt like guilty about having that bad experience because I didn't want it to ruin the trip. And my husband was like, why are you feeling guilty? This is not, you know, he wanted to help and didn't know how. And of course, I talked to my therapist about it and then realized what was going on. But it was a really intense, scary experience. So, you know, when you say the body and the mind, it was like my mind didn't realize that I was safe, you know, it went into that hypervigilance mode. And now that I have experienced it, I know how to handle it better, but just wasn't prepared for it, you know?
yeah, and that's something that you and I also talked about when we chatted, just, tools and things that people can use
Mhm.
when they are triggered to help bring them into their bodies, right? To help create a feeling of safety, right? Because that's the most important thing, right? You didn't feel safe when that was going on.
Right.
Your brain registered that as danger. And then it's very interesting what you just said. You said you felt guilty. So then here comes the shame, right? And that's also something that was, registering with you. So it's really important to be able to ground yourself in the present moment when you start to feel a trigger.
Mhm.
There's a lot of ways that, we can do that. So,
Yeah, I know. We talked about fragmenting, trying to get those pieces together, and all the different ways that people can do that. Do you want to talk a little bit about ways to connect to your body and some therapies?
yeah, definitely. For me too, like I remember being in spaces with a lot of people was a trigger for me. And I would go into panic mode. I developed really, really bad panic attacks, when I was really, I was traumatized and I didn't understand it either. What was going on with me. It was like this feeling of impending doom. I couldn't breathe. I thought I was dying. I went to the ER a few times because of these things, right? And it was really, really scary to be living in this hypervigilant state like all the time. And it was interrupting my work. It's really, really not good, not healthy. And I didn't understand how to work through it. And I remember at the time I was working with a woman who was a holistic health coach, and she was teaching me about tapping. And that's really when I started to like get curious about, wow, like there's other things I can do besides therapy. And I started to explore like other alternative methods. And so that's really what started, my healing journey was around that time in my life. And I was looking for ways to work through the panic. But so, yeah, let's talk about it, right? There's different things you can do to help heal and restore the mind body connection. One of them is EMDR, that's eye movement
Mm.
desensitization and reprocessing. That should be done by a trained, EMDR facilitator. And that involves the process of, just a simple eye movement treatment, right? And you're receiving the treatment, but it's really interesting. I'm not going to go into it, but you're able to associate with the trauma in a safe way. You're able to recall memory during that process. It's pretty fascinating. And it has a really, really high success rate, especially with people who have experienced PTSD. So, if any listeners are watching and they're interested in EMDR, I do have a couple of practitioners that I can refer them to that I really recommend. So that's a great, great therapy. Breath work is really, really powerful. We see a lot of that now in the spiritual community and the online community. And I think it's wonderful that there's so much out there right now, information wise. You can literally hop on Instagram and find a breathwork facilitator,
That's
and
crazy.
chances are, they're doing like a free event. So just breathe, get into your body, and that really helps to regulate the nervous system. Tapping is also really powerful. Tapping helps to ground us and bring us into our bodies. And activating the vagus nerve. That's also something I wanted to bring up, something I learned as well. And that was really, really helpful for me when I would feel panic coming on. So the vagus nerve is a big component of the parasympathetic nervous system. And that's the part of our nervous system that calms us down. So when you're starting to feel like you're going into fight or flee, if you activate that nerve, it can help, almost instantaneously bring you back to a state of calm. And so one of the ways to activate and stimulate the vagus nerve is by stimulating your diver reflex. And it's very simple. The way that you do that is you
The
just go to your
diver, hold on, back up. What happened?
diver reflex,
Diver.
like diving.
Yeah, I'm writing
Yeah.
it down because I think it's fascinating. I'm just
Yeah.
taking notes.
So, you just get to a sink, turn on, really cold water, and you just put your head down like this and splash the cold water up so that you feel the water going up like this. And that can activate your diver reflex. Don't obviously, get the water up your nose. That doesn't feel good, but that really helps. Also splashing the cold water like on your pulse points, your neck, that can also really help to bring you off the ledge, right? When you're in that state of panic, and breath work and tapping. And so if you're okay with it, I'd love to do a little exercise right now with you.
Yes, I have a. Can you hear my dog? It's like always something in my house. Let me know if he gets bad and I'll yell at him.
I don't hear it. So,
Okay, good.
so
He's like, I want to tap.
wants to relax. So
Yeah, let's do it.
yeah, so just allow your shoulders to fall back.
Okay.
Kind of, move them back, get really comfortable wherever you're sitting. And just start to become present, become aware of your breath, your heart beating, the sensations that you feel in your body. And when you're ready, I want you to take a deep diaphragmatic breath in, hold that breath for 3 seconds, and on the exhale, release and let go as far as you can. Okay. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. Doesn't that feel good? It feels so good. And then you can bring your hands up like this. We'll do some tapping, just create fists. And you just want to tap together like this, right? And now turn your hands inward, tap this way. And now count 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Take another deep breath in. Now at this point, I'll usually have whoever it is I'm working with say, it is safe for me to be in my body.
It is safe for me to be in my body.
So.
Wow.
Feels
Saying
good.
those words are powerful. It's not like even thinking it, I'm like, can I say that?
Yeah. Yeah. It is powerful, coupled with that exercise. So thanks for participating. You did great. I heard the dog, but no worries.
He's a puppy, and so we actually, they're quite quiet right now, which is good. We have people, construction workers in our basement right now.
Yeah.
They're not drilling, which is nice, but I think he's hearing them. But if it gets really bad, we can pause and I'll bring him in here. So just let me know.
Sure. Sure.
So you've done such a great job of like taking us through trauma, the different types of trauma, what it looks like when you're in the moment of, having a panic attack, and then ways to calm yourself down. And I think it's great that you mentioned some of these other tactics like EMDR. I have a friend who in LA who was doing some of that, and she also survivor of abuse, and she said it worked well for her as well. And so I want to hear some thoughts from you, and I'll contribute some too, on just everyday tactics, right? It's one of the things that I realized, fortunately, unfortunately, is that just walking outside will trigger you, right? I
Mhm.
mean, even, a COVID related example is now being back out in the world, and being able to take your mask off. Like if you're in a restaurant and you decide to go inside, you're vaccinated and you take your mask off and be indoors, that's a little triggering. Like seeing people without a mask on, I'm like, oh my God, they don't have a mask.
Yeah.
Because our lives have just changed so much. So anyway, that aside, what are some ways that people who have experienced more complex trauma can help themselves when they're being triggered, and whether it's and it could be unexpected. They just drop their kids off at the school and all of a sudden something triggered them.
Mm. So I would really encourage, first of all, thanks for bringing up the COVID situation. We didn't really even get into that, but
Mhm.
on a collective level, we are experiencing like collective PTSD right now, where, people they're like fish out of water. It's like, oh my God, I can go out again, I can do things again, but there's also a fear there still, right? So, um, in that situation or any other situation where you're feeling triggered, it's really important to again ground yourself into the present moment and remind yourself that you're safe, right? You might literally have to talk to yourself in your own voice and say, I am safe, right? I am not repeating the past. It is safe for me to be in my body. That can really, really help, especially when you affirm that you're not repeating the past. And I really like to encourage my clients to create a list of boundaries for themselves. One that helps them establish agency and helps them take their power back. But it also gives them almost like a plan of action and a safety plan, so that when they are in these situations where they're feeling triggered, or they start to feel fight or flee, or they start to disassociate, they can have a piece of paper that they can pull out, and they can literally go down the list and say, okay, these are my boundaries. This is what's safe for me, and this is what doesn't feel safe for me. And you can start to dip your toe in the water little by little, right? So if like going, to a restaurant is still very traumatizing, maybe start to, walk past the restaurant, take a look inside, notice it, but don't go in yet. And keep doing that until you feel ready to walk in, right? And then walk into the front area, speak to the hostess, but don't make a reservation. So does that make sense? It's almost like
Yeah,
baby steps.
baby steps.
Yeah, baby steps for allowing yourself, that time to feel safe in any situation. You don't have to like go right into it. First of all, I want to be really, really clear too and say that you never want to push through healing trauma. There is no pushing through. There is no breaking through. Yes, you will have breakthroughs emotionally during this process, but there's no plowing through it. It can
Mhm.
take years to heal from certain things, right?
Mhm.
I'm still healing. I'm still healing. I'm committed to my own healing process, and I know that it's ongoing. This process never stops. So,
Yeah.
there's no like cure at the end of the, end of the road. We're always evolving. So yeah. So, allow yourself to create that list of healthy boundaries. Allow yourself to have boundaries in relationships too. If your relationship is not healthy, giving yourself permission to walk away from it. you
That is
know,
really, and that can be really hard for people who have been
oh,
abused to do. Really
yeah,
hard.
especially if they're trauma bonded, which is, more often the case. And so really important to have a good support group as well. Like get
Mhm.
yourself a good support group, people who have experienced what you've experienced or can at least identify with the feelings. That's really powerful for a lot of people. Having a trained professional in your corner, whether that be a therapist, a doctor, a coach, a healer, somebody to hold your hand, right, and be there with you
Mhm.
during that time is really important. And also learn how to respond to situations rather than react to them. I think
Mhm.
that's really, really important, and something that you do have to practice,
Can you
right?
can you explain that a little bit more about what that means to respond versus react?
Yeah. So, you know, um, when you are triggered, right? If you're somebody who has experienced trauma, your first inclination, if you've never done any healing work, if you have no idea what's going on, is to react. It's a natural response to danger. You want to react, right? And that could mean running, that could mean disassociating, that could mean, acting out, with aggression. So those are not healthy coping strategies, right? Because if you're not being traumatized, then you don't need to react that way. So it's really important to learn how to respond, and the best way that you can do that is by practicing the power of the pause. That's what I call it. So you just have to literally catch yourself in the moment, pause, take a breath, and again, remind yourself that you are not repeating the past. So, learning how to fall back from a situation when you're triggered and pause. And I'll give you a great example. We live in, the New Jersey, New York area. So, think of, people on the road, right? The drivers in this area are pretty aggressive, are they
They
not? Like,
really are.
people get really upset, they get really triggered, and they fly off the handle really easily. And so, next time, somebody flips you off or cuts you off, instead of, going back at them, just practice the pause, right? Maybe wave bye, hope you have a good day, send them some good energy. I mean, that's a simple example, but because our first reaction might not be the best, right? It might be to also cut someone off or do something like that, and that's not good. So it's really important to take a step back, pause, and say, am I reacting, or am I responding to this in a healthy way? Hmm.
I really love that. They're good skills. I have so people would never believe it, but I have a lot of anger issues. And I've had to learn to not only be patient with myself, but
Hmm.
just do that pause. Because I'll get triggered by something. It happens a lot with my kids even. And I mean, I know a lot of mom will go, "Oh, my kids, make me angry all the time." But that anger is so deep seated because it comes from wanting to control so much. And kids, you can't control kids. I mean, you can try to punish them to control them, but I've learned a lot about myself when it comes to my triggers. Unfortunately, my
Yeah.
my children for a long time triggered me. And so it's like you feel trapped because your trigger was in your house. You
Mhm.
can't, I mean, I could run away if I wanted to, but I don't want to be one of those moms. Um, so having to learn how to, and it's, as you said, it's a journey. It's the healing will always, there's no end day of, oh, I'm 100% healed, this isn't a problem anymore. What I find is that there will be new challenges, like, okay, my kids don't trigger me anymore, I enjoy being around them, and I can figure out in advance what could be a trigger, and then find a way to avoid that being an issue, right? um, but then there'll be something new that I never realized would trigger me, and then it's like something new to figure out, which is why that ongoing process of constantly giving yourself time to breathe, to meditate, to reflect, to write in your journal, to understand how this journey changes over time. To get into that rhythm, I think, is really important. And I will be honest, there are times when I don't want to. There are times when I don't want to write in my journal. I don't want to reflect. I just want to be in this mode of like ignore and don't feel. But then I have bad dreams because everything will come up. But yeah, this is just a reminder to those listening that it's not a one and done, and then you'll never be triggered again. It's an ongoing process. And in some ways, I'm actually happy that I've uncovered new triggers, because it then allows me to create new boundaries to ensure that I continue to be safe. Right.
Mhm. Yeah, totally. And, I think it's really important too, for the listeners to know that it's okay to come out and talk about it too, right? And say like, this happened to me, right? You're not going to get into trouble, nobody's going to come after you. Like if you feel like, there's some things you need to work through, and you've been traumatized, it's important to know that you're not alone and it's okay. And there is hope and there's healing on the other side, right? So I wanted to share that too, because, for me, for a really long time, I was really ashamed. I lived with a lot of shame, Nubia. Like shame was my middle name. I was so ashamed of, what had happened to me growing up. I was so ashamed of who I was, right? I created, beliefs about myself that weren't true, right? But, it's really, really hard to step out of that shame cave when you're in it, when you're deeply in it, and to learn how to like love yourself and accept yourself and give your inner child all that love back. So, please, if you're listening and you've experienced anything traumatic or anything scary, know that it's okay. You don't have to feel ashamed, right? This is part of your story, but it doesn't have to be your story. It's just a part of it.
I'm so glad you said that. That's like the number one thing people feel shame, especially if you decide you're going to be open about it and talk about it, and the responses you get aren't what you want, right?
Mhm.
And because what you really need is that love, the love that you didn't get, and understanding the love that you need as well. A lot of times the love you think you need or want is not the love that you really need. And that can be, I mean,
Yeah.
that's probably like a whole nother conversation.
Yeah. Like learning what's healthy and what's,
Yeah.
infatuation, not,
It's like
yeah.
learning
Mhm.
it all over again. I mean, like the fact that I joke, but I had to learn how to be a loving wife and mother again, and enjoy being a wife and mother again. It was like it was just a lot at once, but, and then allow to be loved. Like I didn't want my husband, I didn't even want him to be around me. I didn't want to touch him. I didn't want him to touch me. I mean, it was really, really hard. And, so, I always say, like, if we can get through this, like you can do it as well. It takes work. It's not easy, but I do not regret going to therapy. I do not regret having children, which allowed me to remember these memories. I don't know if I would have remembered them if I hadn't been a mom, because, I saw myself in my daughter. Who knows? Maybe I would have, if I'd been in therapy long enough to really uncover it. But my point is just, hope. Hope is what I also try to communicate with people, because sometimes it's a dark road, and sometimes you feel like you're alone. And that's why you and I are doing this, is to remind people that you're not alone. There are other people out there. Go to RAINN, RAINN. Is it two N's or one N? I should remember. I'm like on one of their speaker bureau people, but whatever. RAINN.org. I think it's RAINN. They have resources on that site, where you can look for a local support group. That's how I found a support group in West Orange. And it was scary at first to go, but I'm really happy that I did. And, there's so many resources out there. So if you're ready to be with a group, and maybe you aren't ready for a therapist yet, or a one-on-one coach, someone who's trained like Monica, there are a lot of other ways that you could connect with others to get help.
Yeah, definitely. Speak
Mhm.
up, speak up, because you're not alone. And I loved what you said about love, right? There is really nothing else quite like love in this world. And so just having that ability to connect with anybody heart to heart again, it's really powerful. So,
Well, this
so
was so good. I think
I
we're gonna
know,
have
I'm
to do a
so,
part two.
so glad. Exactly right.
So
Dive
many
in.
things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
But you're wonderful. Great advice. I love that we did some tapping. We'll have to think about, what we'll do next time. And maybe the next topic is love, because I think that one is a complicated one, right?
Yeah.
Receiving and giving. So
Yeah, especially
um
in relationships and, how to have healthy relationships, how to develop emotional maturity, right?
mhm, mhm,
Yeah.
yeah, and it can, from romance to professional to friendship. I mean, it's all, it all comes together.
Joy.
So
Yeah.
yeah, this was awesome. So
Yeah.
excited that we did this,
Me
and
too.
stay tuned for part 2. Bye,
All right. Bye, guys.
everyone.